Just over the weekend, I spotted a very interesting documentary on TG Carr. It was in subtitles, so I was able to get most of it. And what it covered was a visit by Charles de Gaulle to Ireland. So, what was that all about? Well, back in 1959, Charles de Gaulle was he was the president of France for quite a long time, and they had a referendum so that he could resign from his post and take on a new president, Pompidou, I think it was. Um, but shortly after he resigned, he disappeared, and he re-emerged in Sneem, County Kerry, in southwest Ireland. And a lot of people wanted to know what that was all about. There was an awful lot of mania at the time, a lot of camera people around that area looking to take pictures of him and to find out what was he doing up there. So, why was he in Kerry? Why was he in the west of Ireland? Um, well, firstly, he was in Cabot's Cove down in South Kerry, and not far from there, he visited a certain homestead of a very famous politician. His name was Daniel O'Connell. Daniel O'Connell was a famous member of Parliament way back in the early 18th century. And he was a bit of a fighter, a bit of a political fighter, in that he fought for Catholic rights in Ireland. And as a result of that, he became known as Daniel the Liberator or Daniel the Emancipator. And he got quite a lot of fame for doing so. And yeah, we saw that in the history books, but maybe we didn't realize that he was actually getting European recognition as well. And that was mainly brought down to the fact that when Daniel was a young person, he studied in northern France. And there he learned a lot about the French history, democracy, republicanism, and everything there about about France and liberty and equality and um, all that. So he visited Daniel O'Connell's homestead, and as it turned out, it became known that that Charles de Gaulle's great grandmother or his grandmother had actually written a book about Daniel O'Connell, and it was possibly through his grandmother's passion for Daniel O'Connell that Charles de Gaulle might have taken on a passion for this particular political leader and probably sought some inspiration from him. Um, so possibly. So later on in his tour, he visited Galway, and he stayed there to write his memoirs. At the time, the election of Pompidou was happening, so there was um, a lot of interest in what was Charles de Gaulle's views on that. But as it turned out, part of his itinerary had to be cut off. He was going to visit County Derry. And the reason that he wanted to visit County Derry was because his great grandmother or his grandmother happened to be McEntee or McIntyre. And there's a church up there in Derry where there's a whole scatter of his ancestors buried up there. And the reason that that he wanted to go visit the that family cemetery was account of the fact that back in the Battle of the Boyne, his family were fighting for James the First. Unfortunately, it was William of Orange they should have been supporting, the Protestant king, because he went on to achieve victory in the Battle of the Boyne. And so, of course, that family were then forced to flee or find refuge. They became known as the Wild Geese, and in turn, they settled in northern France, and they went on to agitate, fight for Catholicism, the Church, possibly even a free Ireland as well. They earned distinguished. They have a distinguished history, and their name does pop up in a lot of different battles on mainland Europe. So finally, Charles de Gaulle goes to Dublin, where he visits Uachtar na HÉireann, and at that time was, of course, Eamon de Valera. And it was a very cordial reception. It was very friendly. They seemed to have an awful lot in common. Firstly, physically, they are both very tall men, and it was observed that whenever they were talking to each other, it was at eye level, that kind of way. So there was a lot of physical similarities between them. And then when you delved into it even further, they had a lot of life experience that was pretty similar as well. For example, the fact that de Gaulle was a soldier, de Valera fought in the Easter Rising as well. De Gaulle, when Nazi Germany took over France, de Gaulle said no, and as a result, he set up the Free French government in exile in London. Likewise with de Valera, he didn't have a country that was in existence either, but he set up a government as well. Both of them are very obstinate, hard-nosed politicians, in that de Gaulle was well known for for saying no to Truman. He said no to Churchill, and likewise de Valera was pretty obstinate in front of those world leaders as well. And it caused quite a lot of consternation, particularly in the Second World War, where Churchill and Truman would want to do it their way, and of course they couldn't do anything without ratification from the tall fella. And likewise, when Churchill and Truman were putting heavy pressure on de Valera to open the treaty ports to allow the convoys safe passage, de Valera said no. So there was an awful lot of similarity between both those leaders, and both de Gaulle and de Valera, they went on to be presidents of their countries, their respective countries, for a very, very long time. So what do I get from all of this? I found it very interesting. But what do I get out of this? Well, it does inspire me. I would encourage that you do look at leaders in the past and see how they went about doing things. They came from a different stock. It was noted in the documentary that, like, cometh the hour, cometh the man. De Gaulle was just a general when the Nazis invaded Germany, but it took somebody like de Gaulle to stand up against them, to turn things around for the French. And as a consequence of that, de Gaulle is recognized as one of the greatest leaders of France, second only to Napoleon. So just the general qualities of de Gaulle that really inspire me to, like, I have to be a bit more stubborn. I have to be a bit more obstinate if I have to bring about the things that I want to bring about. And secondly, just the ancestry. It's so important to know where you came from. And sure enough, like, if you look back in your own ancestry, you might think there's not much there. But the reality is like, we've been through so much. Our forefathers have been through so much famine, war, you name it. They survived it, and we're the consequence of that. So it's incumbent on us to, if we don't have any famous military leaders in our ancestry, well, maybe it's time we started making our own. That's all I have to say. Think about that. Take care.